In a small Midwestern town, where racial tensions were often palpable but rarely discussed openly, one summer night would upset the fragile balance of the community. Darren Carter, a 22-year-old black man, had just completed his studies in criminology and planned to follow in his father's footsteps by joining the federal forces. Intelligent, athletic and passionate about justice, he dreamed of making a difference in a system he knew was imperfect. His father, Special Agent Marcus Carter, a respected FBI veteran, had dedicated his life to tracking down the nation's most dangerous criminals. But neither his badge nor his experience could prepare him for the tragedy that would befall him. That night, Darren was returning home from a night out with friends. He drove carefully in his SUV, listening to music, savoring the feeling of freedom that this pivotal period in his life gave him. He was about to start a new chapter, full of hope and ambition. But his dream was going to come to an abrupt end. The flashing lights of a police car illuminated the cabin. He sighed. Like many young black men, he knew what that meant. He pulled over to the side of the road, turned off the engine and kept his hands clearly visible on the steering wheel, following to the letter the advice his father had given him since he was a teenager.
No sudden movements, no unnecessary dispute.
Two white officers, Officer Randall and Officer Stevens, approached the vehicle, their footsteps echoing on the asphalt in a silent but menacing dance. Their silhouettes stood out in the harsh glow of the street lamps, a cold light which highlighted their rigid postures, their arms outstretched towards their weapon belts, their faces impassive but marked by a sort of calculated distrust. A latent hostility hung in the air, almost palpable, like an invisible mist that invaded space. The atmosphere, already tense, was charged with silent violence. Randall, dominating the scene with the confidence of a man who knows he has power, shined his flashlight directly at Darren, temporarily blinding his already accustomed to darkness eyes. The harsh light assaulted him, momentarily shaking his perception. He blinked, trying to adjust to the brutal clarity. "Get out of the vehicle. Immediately." Randall's voice, authoritative and sharp, sounded like an irrevocable order, devoid of any nuance of humanity. It wasn't a question. Darren, frozen for a moment, felt adrenaline rush through his body, but he suppressed the instinct that wanted to make him react. He was not naive. He knew that one bad reaction could change everything. Rather than panic, he opted for caution. He calmly asked the reason for the arrest, his voice seeking to maintain a note of civility, a desire to diffuse the situation before it got out of control. "Non-compliant plates," Randall replied dryly, the coldness of his response sounding like an empty accusation, unfounded, unproven. Darren knew it was just an excuse, a trumped-up justification. His vehicle was perfectly in order, his insurance and his papers in order. But in this world, he knew the truth. He couldn't afford to be seen as a threat. He inhaled slowly, trying to quell the rush of adrenaline pounding through his veins, and gently unbuckled his seat belt. Each gesture was measured, precise, like a man walking on eggshells. He opened the door with the greatest caution, taking care not to make any sudden movements. He stood slowly, raising his hands above his head as a clear sign that he posed no threat. He didn't want to complicate things. But despite his efforts to remain calm, Stevens, the other police officer, reacted with violence that had nothing to do with the situation. Shouting contradictory orders, he began to shout with no apparent logic. "Hands on the car."
No, back off.
"Show me your papers."
No sudden movements.
Every word seemed to make the situation worse. Darren, desperately calm, tried to follow instructions, wondering deep down how long he could keep up this charade without falling victim to the panic or thoughtlessness of one or other of the officers. He leaned down slowly, searching for his wallet in the inside pocket of his jacket. His fingers brushed against the leather of the wallet, trying to gently pull it out. He knew what might happen if he rushed. But this movement, as slow and measured as it was, seemed to trigger something in Randall. The latter, in a fraction of a second, believing he saw a weapon, or claiming to have seen it, drew his pistol. Time seemed to stand still, and the world around Darren froze in utter confusion. Before he could react, the sharp crack of gunshots erupted through the night. The sound of the bullets was deafening, tearing apart the peace of the moment. Darren felt a searing pain through his body, the heat of the violence hitting him full force. His body sank heavily on the asphalt, a slow and inevitable fall. His hands clenched on the ground as he let the wallet escape, which slowly slipped from his fingers, ending up on the asphalt like a silent witness to the absurdity of the tragedy that had just played out. The scene, now frozen, took on a heavy irony. He had never been a threat. He never intended to do any harm. But in the fatal moment when his fingers brushed his wallet, he had become a victim of a system that saw him as an enemy before it even sought to understand him. Reality was built around this false accusation, and Darren, a man of innocence, was killed by bullets. The officers realized too late the extent of their act. But instead of immediately calling for help, they hastened to concoct an official version that would exonerate them. He behaved suspiciously. He resisted. We felt threatened. However, what they didn't know was that Darren was not a simple citizen. He was the son of an FBI agent. And Marcus Carter was not a man who would let his son's death fade into the limbo of statistics. When Marcus Carter received the call in the middle of the night, a cold shiver ran down his spine, as if a cold shadow had just invaded his heart. This was not just an emergency. It was a tragedy. He knew that this kind of call never meant anything good. Arriving on the scene, he was struck by the scene of chaos before him. Her son, Darren, lying in a pool of blood, his body riddled with bullets, his eyes drained of all light. Around him, a handful of police officers exchanged nervous smiles, seeking to justify their action, their voices tinged with guilt hidden behind falsely reassuring words. With a terrifying calm, an icy rage hidden behind every gesture, Marcus approached one of the officers in charge. His gaze, sharp as a blade, left no room for dispute. He presented himself with the authority that was his status as a federal agent becoming obvious. He demanded to see all the available evidence. Instantly, the dynamic changed. The police, who thought they could escape the truth, froze. Looks turned away, smiles faded. Marcus was not a man who could be manipulated. He knew there was no room for ignorance or submission. The police initially tried to cover up the affair, but Marcus, with implacable determination, was not ready to give in. What they didn't know was that his network and influence were vast, and he knew exactly where to strike. He mobilized his team to recover recordings from surveillance cameras in the street. The videos showed unequivocally that Darren, his son, had done nothing wrong. He was neither a threat nor a danger. He was a young man looking to return home. The images were relentless, revealing the gratuitous brutality of the attack. When the video leaked to the media, it had the effect of a bomb. A shock wave crossed the country. The images of Darren, shot for no reason, tore the veil of indifference, and citizens, outraged, took to the streets en masse. Demonstrations broke out in several major cities, the anger of citizens turning into a unanimous cry, "Justice for Darren." The officers responsible, Randall and Stevens, were immediately placed on administrative leave, but Marcus knew it was only an initial victory. He wasn't going to stop there. He used all his influence to get the FBI to open a federal investigation into local police. The system, for the first time, was faced with pressure that it could not ignore. But even though this investigation would shake the foundations of the police department, Marcus knew that no investigation, no verdict would bring his son back. He then felt an indescribable pain, a void that no justice could fill. But instead of allowing himself to be overcome by suffering, he transformed that pain into a mission. He swore to himself that his fight would not be in vain. He would become the voice of all fathers who, like him, found themselves in this unthinkable position, torn from their flesh by a racist and biased justice system. He launched a crusade to fight police abuse, to ensure that no family would ever again experience the ordeal he had just experienced. Marcus was now fighting for a future where police officers were not above the law, where young black men were not seen as targets by default. Darren Carter's name became a symbol of this struggle, a symbol of the injustice that too many black families had endured for generations. His name joined those of other young black men victims of biased and brutal justice. But it wasn't just a name associated with suffering. His legacy, through his father, became a catalyst for necessary change. Marcus, devastated but steadfast, became one of the most influential voices for reforming America's police system. And in the streets of the country, through demonstrations, marches and rallies, a slogan resonated more and more loudly: Darren Carter died for obeying. This rallying cry became a powerful echo, a collective promise, that the memory of Darren Carter and that of all the others will not sink into oblivion.